Testing. Testing. Hey, how you doing? Didn't see you there. So this is, since I went to the Daniel Boone original gravesite, it's one of those videos where I wanted to make another video so people could see what I was talking about. Just kind of gives you a better context of why I went there. Who is the real Daniel Boone? This is Mr. Beat. I've never done videos on his channel. I have seen a couple of his videos. He's a former history teacher, I believe. I will say he leans more Democratic, so his view on things might be more skewed to one side or the other. I'm just throwing that out there in case people hear something and they're like, what? So let's just go ahead and get into who the real Daniel Boone was. Let's go.
I am Mr. Beat. One of the most well-known folk heroes in American history is Daniel Boone. He became a legend in the early days of the country after tales of his adventures as an explorer and pioneer got out there. However, long after his death, those tales got a little bit out of hand. Today, Boone is one of the most misunderstood figures in American history. This is mostly due to how he was portrayed later in books in the 19th century, and numerous comic strips, radio shows, and films in the 20th century. Then, of course, Daniel Boone was a man, yes, a big man. There was this TV show about him that was popular in the 1960s. The actor in that show, Fez Parker, basically acted like the same way he did in a previous role playing Davy Crockett. Needless to say, the show was not historically accurate at all. In fact, Daniel Boone never actually wore a coonskin cap like Parker did in that show. That's a myth that he ever wore a coonskin cap. So why am I wearing a coonskin cap? Goodness. Get this out of here. Whose idea was this? Anyway, while the mythology surrounding Daniel Boone's life is often remembered, the truth is often forgotten. Since this is a history channel, let's just dig right in to the real history behind Daniel Boone, shall we? Daniel Boone was born on November 2nd, 1734 in what became Berks County, Pennsylvania, today an hour's drive from Philadelphia. His parents squatted...
I just want to add that I decided to do the Daniel Boone thing because I did an audiobook called Blood and Treasure by Bob Drury and Tom Clavin. And it's just kind of tells a story. It was a fast book, but it was really good. Just see, it's 11 hours 23 minutes, 47 tracks. It was a very fast-paced story about his life. So not trying to take away anything, I just wanted to share as to how I got into it. I knew who Daniel Boone was, but I didn't know enough about him. But that was the reason why I got into it. If you have any interest in that, in any of the books or the audiobook, I recommend Blood and Treasure, but I don't know much about any of the other books. I've never looked into any other books. So I could have gotten the worst book, but it was really good. Back to this. Sorry, Mr. Beat.
And Sarah Boone were Quakers who escaped persecution for their religious beliefs back in England. Daniel was a middle child, 6th of 11 children. The family lived just down the road from future President Abraham Lincoln's ancestors. In fact, Abraham Lincoln's great-grandfather, also named Abraham Lincoln, married Daniel's cousin Anne. As a kid, Daniel spent most of his time at the edge of the frontier, often taking his family's cattle out to graze. He loved wandering in the woods with those cows. He regularly interacted with the Lenape Indians, who the Quakers as a whole had a good relationship with. Daniel actually learned how to hunt from the Lenape, in addition to other local settlers. He got his first rifle at the age of 12, and by 13, he was regularly providing meat for family meals. One time, a panther leapt right at him, and he calmly cocked his rifle and shot him through the heart. Yeah, that probably didn't really happen, but the fact that that story got around is evidence Daniel had quite the reputation as a skilled hunter. Daniel never attended school, but family members did teach him how to read and write. Later, his go-to books were the Bible and Gulliver's Travels. In 1750, Squire Boone moved the family to North Carolina, settling in the Yadkin River Valley, near what is now Davie County. This was again an area at the edge of the frontier. Daniel joined the local militia to help defend the settlements from various local American Indian tribes. When North Carolina Governor Matthew Rowan called for a militia during the French and Indian War, Boone, now 20 years old, volunteered. He served under General Edward Braddock as he led forces to attack at Fort Duquesne, a French military post located at present-day Pittsburgh. George Washington, future president but at the time a young colonial militia leader, was also on that march. Boone worked as a wagoner, meaning he was one of the dudes who drove the horse-drawn wagons. On the trip, Boone met and befriended a trader named John Finley. Finley had lots of experience trading with different groups of American Indians and had traveled quite a bit. He told Boone about a place called Kentucky, where the deer, buffalo,
and antelope roam. All right, come on. No one cares about Wells Fargo. All right. I like how the picture just went terrible. That's nice.
Where the deer, buffalo, bear, and turkey were plentiful. Boone was intrigued, to say the least. Things did not end well for the Braddock expedition. In the Battle of Monongahela, Braddock was mortally wounded and the British badly defeated. Boone barely escaped death, escaping by horseback to North Carolina. Soon after, Boone met Rebecca Bryan. They fell in love and married on August 14th, 1756. A couple years later, Boone was at war again, serving in the militia during the Anglo-Cherokee War. During this time, his family temporarily moved to Culpeper County, Virginia. After the conflict ended, they moved back to North Carolina.
Culpeper County was the name of the county that George Washington was a surveyor in, and later became the name of the spy ring, which was the Culper ring, and it went to because it was Culper County. Side note.
Over the next several years, Boone made a living as a hunter and trapper in the fur trade. He'd often be gone for days at a time. Every fall, he'd go on, quote, long hunts deep into the Appalachian Mountains that sometimes lasted months. Business trips, you could call them. Sometimes Boone went with a small group of guys, all called long hunters, gathering hundreds of deer skins or beaver or otter pelts in one trip. Other times, Boone went alone, and no one really knew where he was. In 1768, Boone's old friend, John Finley, caught up with him. By this time, Rebecca and him had 6 kids, and Boone was getting increasingly frustrated with North Carolina Governor William Tryon and the British government altogether, which seemed to be biased against those settling out west. Finley had again told Boone about Kentucky and how he had planned on going back. He asked Boone to join him. Boone couldn't resist. On May 1st, 1769, Finley and Boone set out to Kentucky. They were joined by 4 others, including Boone's brother-in-law, John Stewart. No, not that John Stewart. Yeah, that one. That one. That one. We don't know what he looked like either, okay? A land speculator named Richard Henderson provided the supplies for their trip. It was quite a trip. Boone and the others built the first known trail from North Carolina into eastern Tennessee. They went through the Cumberland Gap and up the Cumberland River into Kentucky. They spent the next 2 years exploring the wilderness and, of course, hunting. Not once, but twice did the Shawnee Indians capture Boone. The first time they captured him, they took his skins and set him free, warning him to never come back. The second time, Boone escaped. In 1770, Stewart went missing, and they later found found out that this time he was killed by American Indians. Some Cherokees caught up to Boone and the others one more time on their way home in 1771 and stole all the skins they had, warning them to not come back. Well, they did. 2 years later, Boone brought his whole family, which now included 8 kids, as well as a group of about 50 immigrants, through the Cumberland Gap to establish a permanent settlement in Kentucky.
Side note, I don't know if it was during this trip that he was gone for so long, but his wife and his youngest brother ended up, I guess, hearing that he had died or believing that he had died because the other guy, his body was found, and they knew they went together. And so they just assumed Daniel Boone was killed too. Now, you never found the bodies back then. I mean, rarely did you get a body returned. I shouldn't say rarely. I don't know what the percentage was. So Daniel Boone's wife slipped up, thinking he was dead. Moment of weakness. Hooked up with Daniel Boone's youngest brother. She got pregnant. Lo and behold, Daniel Boone returns home, sees her pregnant, or maybe returns home after she had the baby, finds out what happened, and basically says, I get it. You thought I was dead. You know, my brother's similar to me. You had a moment of weakness, but you kept it in the family. So he raised the kid like it was his own. That's just a side note on the Daniel Boone story.
Left on July 5th, 1773. Keep in mind that not only the Cherokee and Shawnee warned them not to do this, but also the British government, which had not opened western Kentucky to settlement. In October, a group of Lenapes, Shawnees, and Cherokees attacked. They captured, tortured, and brutally killed 6 men, including Boone's oldest son, James. This freaked out the immigrants, and everybody headed back to North Carolina. Soon, Lord Dunmore's War broke out, in which the colony of Virginia fought the Shawnee and Mingo tribes for control over what is now West Virginia and Kentucky. During that conflict, Boone made a name for himself in the militia defending settlements along the Clinch River. He was even promoted to captain. Virginia ended up winning, opening up settlement out west. And now, Richard Henderson, that land speculator dude I mentioned earlier, wanted to start a new colony out there called Transylvania. He bought some land from the Cherokee and once again hired Boone to create a reliable trail that led out there. In 1775, Boone led the efforts to create what became known as the Wilderness Road, which cut through the Cumberland Gap into central Kentucky. He was a trailblazer! Get it?
Just cool it, Mr. Beat.
Boone founded a settlement eventually called Boonesboro. Great name. Great name. He then came back to North Carolina to bring his family and other settlers there on September 8th, 1775. By this time, the American War of Independence was going on, and they couldn't escape it in Kentucky. In fact, American Indians, who were mad about losing Kentucky, saw the war as a chance to drive out American colonists to get their land back. By the spring of 1776, this scared away all but less than 200 colonists living in Kentucky. Boone and his family were among those who stayed. Boonesboro was under constant threat, and Boone and others fortified the settlement to protect against American Indian raids. However, on July 5th, 1776, that's right, the day after the United States declared independence and became a country, Boone's daughter Jemima, as well as 2 other girls, were captured by a small group of Shawnee and Cherokee men while canoeing. But Boone...
Jemima was his favorite child, by the way.
Boone was all like,
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
and led a group of men to catch up to them 2 days later. They were able to rescue the girls. The next year, Boone was shot in the ankle after another Shawnee attack on Boonesboro. While Boone recovered, the Shawnees persisted with their attacks, eventually destroying all of Boonesboro's cattle and crops. With the supply of food running low and the settlers of Boonesboro trapped inside, they needed salt to preserve the little meat they had left. So in January 1778, Boone led an expedition of 30 men to get some salt. However, the Shawnee, led by the warrior Blackfish, captured them. Boone was able to convince Blackfish not to capture Boonesboro. However, he now became a prisoner of the Shawnee. Later on, though, a Shawnee family, impressed with his scouting and hunting skills, adopted him and gave him a bit more freedom. Boone lived among the Shawnee for about 4 months when he escaped and returned to Boonesboro, successfully helping defend it against further attacks. Meanwhile, Boone's family had just assumed he was dead and had moved back to North Carolina. Boy, were they surprised when he showed up to take them back to Kentucky. In addition to his family, Boone brought a bunch of other settlers, supposedly also including the ancestors of Abraham Lincoln with him. He started a new settlement called Boone's Station. Boone collected a bunch of money for settlers to buy land warrants, but it was stolen, and it took him years to pay back. Did you know Boone was also a politician? Heck yeah, he was. In 1781, voters elected him to represent them in the Virginia legislature. Throughout all of this, the War of Independence raged on, and Boone decided to fight on the side of the Americans. He fought with General George Rogers Clark when he invaded Ohio in 1780. Soon after that, the Shawnee captured Daniel's brother, Ned, and chopped off his head and displayed it as a trophy, thinking it was Daniel. Daniel also lost his son, Israel, in the Battle of Blue Licks on August 19th, 1782. After the war finally ended, Boone helped establish a port on the Ohio River, which is today Maysville, Kentucky. On Boone's 50th birthday, historian John Filson released a book called The Discovery, Settlement, and Present State of Kentucky, in which he chronicled his adventures. The book turned Boone into a national and even international celebrity. Throughout the rest of the 1780s, Boone continued his involvement in the militia and in politics in the Virginia legislature. He also worked as a surveyor, a land speculator, traded horses, and even kept a tavern. And he finally built up some wealth, buying up tens of thousands of acres of land. He even owned 7 slaves. Ultimately, though, he was not smart with his investments and ended up with a lot of debt. He resettled with his family in Point Pleasant in modern-day West Virginia in 1788 and started a trading post. However, in 1795, the trading post failed and Boone and the family headed back to Kentucky. By 1798, Boone had lost all of his land due to both disputed land claims and debt. He was back where he started, hunting and trapping. He wanted a fresh start, and Spain offered him a home. Wait, huh? Spain? Yep, Spanish Louisiana, that is. In 1799, Boone and his family headed out to Upper Louisiana in what is today eastern Missouri to start a new life. Keep in mind that by this time, Boone was an old man in his mid-60s. The Spanish welcomed Boone with military honors, waiving the normal requirements for settling there and giving him 850 acres of great farmland just west of St. Louis. They even made him a military leader and judge in charge of a district. Louisiana would come under French control and then American control shortly after that. Since Boone only had a verbal agreement with Spain, he lost his land claims in 1804, but still was able to live in the area with family members who had secured land. Eventually, President James Madison signed a law giving Boone his 850 acres. However, as soon as that happened, he had to sell the property to pay off folks back in Kentucky who'd heard the news and demanded he pay his old debts. After the War of 1812 broke out, Boone tried to volunteer to fight, but they didn't take him. He was 77 years old by that time, after all. In 1813, Rebecca, who had been by his side for nearly 60 years, died. Boone did remain active, however, in his final years, still hunting and trapping whenever he could. Supposedly, he made one trip in those final years all the way west to the Rocky Mountains, but that's probably not true. Also, supposedly, he made one final trip back to Kentucky during those final years, but that's probably not true either. Boone died at his son Nathan's stone house near Defiance on September 26, 1820, of acute indigestion, the year before Missouri became a state. He was 85. After he died, his legendary status only grew. Timothy Flint's biographical memoir of Daniel Boone, the first settler of Kentucky, released in 1833, was one of the best-selling biographies of the 19th century, and for nearly every decade after that, it seems like there was a new book about him, each stretching the truth a bit more and more. His adventures, whether real or not, pretty much form the basis of the stereotypical hero of the American West, symbolizing the soul of manifest destiny and the American spirit, for better or for worse. Today, he remains one of the most well-known figures in American history. Boone's grandson, Alphonso Boone, went on to become a pioneer himself. He was an early settler of the Willamette River Valley in Oregon, getting there in 1846 and establishing Boone's Ferry, an important link in Oregon for more than 100 years. 3 generations of Daniel Boone's descendants have also played baseball professionally. Ray Boone, his son Bob, and grandchildren Brett and Aaron all played Major League Baseball. The singer Pat Boone is also a descendant. So take away all the mythology about Daniel Boone and he was still the world's most interesting man. At least one of them. But hey, you're an interesting person too. I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts about Daniel Boone? Before I go, I want to give a shout out to not one, but 2 books that I used while researching for this video. The first one is one of the most definitive books about Daniel Boone. It's by John McFarriger. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And the book is called Daniel Boone, The Life and Legend of an American Pioneer. And it does a good job sorting through all of the mythology surrounding Boone and just gets right to the facts. I put an affiliate link in the description of this video if you are interested in buying it. It helps me and it also helps you hopefully get a good deal on the book. And another book that not only has great information about Boone, but also all of westward expansion American history is this one, The American Heritage History of the Great West. This is an amazing book. Holy crap, it's a gem. This is probably one of my top 10 history books of all time. I strongly recommend it. It was fun digging this thing out again. And I also have a link for that. And finally, this video was suggested.
Okay. So I hope you got a little better impression of Daniel Boone and kind of why I wanted to go to his grave, even though it was his original grave. But he's a fascinating person in American history. So, I'm going to end this here. You can donate to the channel with the thanks button. Subscribe, thumbs up, all that stuff's great. I made some shorts visiting the grave, the original grave. It was very... It was just a nice area, but wish I could have seen a little bit more. Couldn't go to the house because the house is still occupied, but still, maybe you can appreciate him for things that he's done. Maybe not, I don't know. But until next time, have a good day, have a good night.